Chosen from the cradle. 6 childhood signs God gave you a purpose. Some people enter this world quietly, as if life is waiting to see who they will become. Others arrive with an invisible weight already resting on their shoulders. Before they understand words like calling or destiny, before they can explain what they feel, there is a sense that life is already asking something of them. If that was you, you didn't imagine it. From your earliest memories, there may have been an awareness that set you apart. Not confidence, not clarity, just a deep, unshakable sense that you were meant for something more, something serious, something meaningful. While other children lived freely in the moment, your heart often felt older than your age. You noticed things others ignored. You felt pain more deeply. You questioned life sooner than most. The Bible shows us a pattern that is rarely talked about. God does not wait until adulthood to begin shaping his chosen ones. He begins early, sometimes painfully early. Purpose is not assigned when we are ready to understand it, but when God knows what the future will demand from us. This is why childhood looks different for those chosen from the cradle. Not easier, often harder. More pressure, more questions, more moments that feel unfair, but none of it random, none of it wasted. You may have spent years wondering why your story didn't look like everyone else's, why you felt misunderstood, overlooked, or burdened before you ever had the strength to carry it. You may have questioned God in silence, not out of rebellion, but out of exhaustion. And still, somehow, something always pulled you back toward him even when you tried to walk away. That pull is not coincidence. It is evidence. God's hand was on you long before you could recognize his voice. He was forming your spirit while others were still forming habits. He was preparing your heart for weight, for responsibility, for impact. This message is not about elevating yourself above others. It is about understanding your journey so you can stop mislabeling your preparation as punishment. Because when you don't recognize early calling, you may grow up trying to heal wounds that were never meant to break you, but to build you. If your childhood felt heavier than it should have, this is not condemnation. It is confirmation. And what once confused you is now ready to be revealed. Number 1. A childhood marked by unusual sensitivity to God. One of the earliest signs that a person has been chosen from the cradle is a sensitivity that never quite fit their age. While others were carefree, something in you was awake too soon. You felt things deeply: joy, sorrow, injustice, holiness. Even when you didn't have the words to explain them, your heart responded to spiritual weight before your mind could understand it. As a child, you may have been unusually aware of right and wrong, not because someone drilled rules into you, but because your conscience was already active. Certain words felt heavy. Certain actions felt wrong in a way you couldn't ignore. You may have felt guilt more intensely than other children, or compassion that startled adults around you. When others laughed at cruelty, something inside you recoiled. This kind of sensitivity is not emotional fragility. It is spiritual receptivity. The Bible consistently shows that God often awakens the spirits of his chosen ones early, not to burden them, but to prepare them. A sensitive heart is easier to shape, easier to teach, and harder to corrupt. God does not first strengthen the hands. He refines the heart, and hearts that feel deeply are hearts that can carry divine responsibility later. You may have noticed God before you knew his name. Moments of quiet may have felt sacred. Darkness may have felt unsettling beyond normal childhood fear. Prayer, even simple, awkward prayer, may have felt natural, as if you were speaking to someone you already knew. And when life hurt you, your instinct may not have been to numb the pain, to ask why. That is not random. Many chosen children struggle because adults mistake spiritual sensitivity for weakness. They are told they are too emotional, too serious, or too intense. But what was really happening was this. God had tuned your inner world to frequencies others could not hear yet, and without guidance, that sensitivity sometimes turned inward, becoming confusion, sadness, or self-doubt. You may have felt overwhelmed by environments others tolerated easily. Loudness, chaos, dishonesty, or cruelty drained you. You sensed things in people that couldn't be proven but were later confirmed. You felt atmospheres shift. You picked up on tension adults pretended didn't exist. And when something was spiritually off, your body often reacted before your mind did. This is the cost of being spiritually aware early. But here is the truth many never hear. God guards what he intends to use. Sensitivity is how he guards you. It is how he keeps you from becoming hardened, reckless, or spiritually dull. While others learn empathy later through failure, you were being trained through awareness. Yes, it made childhood harder. Yes, it made you feel different, but it also kept your spirit alive. If you were sensitive from a young age, it was because God trusted your heart with depth. He knew you would one day need to discern, to feel, to intercede, to understand pain that others dismiss, and that kind of calling cannot be built in a shallow soul. What once felt like a burden was actually a foundation. And now, as you grow, God is not asking you to lose that sensitivity, but to understand it, steward it, and let him strengthen it. Because a sensitive heart in God's hands becomes a powerful one. Number 2, early rejection, isolation, or always feeling different. Another unmistakable sign of being chosen from the cradle is that belonging never came easily. Even in rooms full of people, there was often a quiet sense that you didn't fully fit. You could participate, laugh, and go along, but something in you remained separate, as if your spirit stood a step outside the circle. This kind of isolation often begins early. As a child, you may have been excluded without knowing why. You weren't always disliked. Yet you weren't fully embraced either. Friendships felt temporary. Groups shifted without you. Sometimes you were chosen last. Other times you were ignored altogether, and the most confusing part was that you couldn't point to a clear reason. The Bible reveals a consistent pattern. God separates before he elevates. Long before he reveals purpose publicly, he marks people privately through distance. Separation is not rejection from God. It is protection from becoming shaped by the wrong influences too early. When God places a calling on a child, he often limits deep attachment to environments that would dilute that calling. So while others were blending in, you were being quietly set apart. That separation may have felt like punishment, but it was preparation. You may have learned early how to be alone, how to think for yourself, how to observe rather than absorb. While others depended heavily on peer approval, you developed an inner world, and although loneliness hurt, it also strengthened your capacity to stand without applause. Even family relationships may have felt complicated. You may have loved deeply, yet felt unseen, understood, less, expected to be mature before you were ready. Sometimes the people closest to you didn't know what to do with the depth you carried, so they minimized it or misunderstood it. This kind of isolation can wound if it's misinterpreted. Many chosen people grow up asking, "What's wrong with me?" when the real question should have been, "What is God protecting in me?" Isolation refines discernment. It teaches you to hear God without noise. It trains you to lead without dependence, and it removes the addiction to approval that would later compromise your assignment. Biblically, those God used most powerfully were often separated long before they were recognized. They were hidden, overlooked, or misunderstood, yet never forgotten by God. The absence of human validation made room for divine formation. If you felt different early, it was not because you were defective. It was because your spirit was incompatible with shallow spaces. God was teaching you how to walk alone so that one day you could stand firm when others followed. And though isolation may have shaped your childhood, it does not define your future. God does not isolate to abandon. He isolates to prepare. When the time is right, He brings the right people, those who can walk with your depth, not compete with it. What once felt like rejection was actually refinement. And what felt like loneliness was often God quietly teaching you how to depend on Him first. Number 3, carrying heavy burdens and trials too early in life. Another sign of being chosen from the cradle is that life seemed to hand you weight before it handed you strength. While other children were allowed to simply be children, you were introduced to responsibility, loss, or emotional pressure far earlier than expected. Your childhood may have felt shortened, not by choice but by circumstance. You may have been required to grow up quickly, to be strong for others, to understand things no child should have had to process yet. Some of your peers were protected from pain while you were forced to learn endurance, and often no one explained why it had to be you. The Bible shows that God often allows early trials not to harden His chosen ones, but to deepen them. Pressure reveals capacity, and when God knows someone will one day carry great spiritual weight, He begins strengthening their inner foundation early, sometimes through hardship that feels excessive for the season of life it appears in. As a child, you may have been exposed to loss, instability, conflict, or emotional responsibility that shaped how you saw the world. You learned caution instead of carelessness, awareness instead of innocence, and although that may have cost you certain joys, it also gave you something rare, depth. Yet these early trials were not a sign of God's absence. They were evidence of His long-term vision. God sees beyond childhood. He sees the future moments where your character, empathy, and resilience will be required. So He trains you early, not because He is harsh, but because He is intentional. Many chosen individuals carry a quiet grief they never fully processed because they didn't have the language or permission to do so. They were praised for being strong while silently longing to be held. And over time, strength became their identity, though it was born from necessity, not choice. But here is what Scripture reveals. Suffering in God's hands is never meaningless. It becomes wisdom. It becomes discernment. It becomes compassion that cannot be taught through comfort alone. Those who have carried weight early learn how to carry others later, without judgment. You may still feel the echo of those early burdens, a seriousness, a caution, a sense that life is fragile. But those traits are not scars. They are tools. God was shaping your capacity to lead with understanding rather than assumption. If your childhood felt heavier than it should have, it was because God was building something in you that required depth, patience, and endurance. He was teaching your soul how to stand when life presses hard. What once felt unfair was forming faith that would not collapse under pressure. And what once overwhelmed you was quietly preparing you to become someone others could lean on when their world begins to shake. Number 4. A deep pull toward meaning, purpose, and justice from a young age. Another clear sign of being chosen from the cradle is that your heart was never satisfied with shallow answers. Even as a child, you were drawn toward questions that others avoided. While people around you were content with simple explanations, you wanted to understand why. Why things were unfair, why people suffered, why God allowed certain things to happen, why life felt heavier than it looked. This hunger for meaning is not intellectual curiosity alone. It is spiritual awareness. God places it early in those He intends to use with clarity and conviction later. Purpose-driven lives begin with purpose-driven questions. You may have felt disturbed by injustice long before you had the words to name it. Certain behaviors didn't just bother you, they troubled your spirit. You noticed hypocrisy. You sensed when something was wrong, even if everyone else ignored it, and instead of adapting to broken systems, your heart resisted them. The Bible shows that God often stirs dissatisfaction early in the lives of those He will later send to confront, guide, or protect others. Comfort rarely produces conviction, but awareness creates responsibility. As a child, you may have struggled in environments that discouraged questioning. You were told to stop thinking so much, just accept it, or don't be so serious. Yet, something in you refused to turn off. You weren't trying to rebel. You were trying to understand. Your spirit was reaching for alignment with truth, not approval. This inner pull toward purpose often made childhood confusing. You felt restless even when nothing was technically wrong. You longed for something meaningful but didn't know what it was yet. Ordinary goals felt empty. Superficial success didn't excite you. You were searching for impact before you understood calling. That restlessness is not a flaw, it is a signal. God uses dissatisfaction to keep chosen ones from settling too early. While others find comfort in routine, God awaits hunger in you so you don't confuse survival with fulfillment. He teaches you early that life is more than existing. It is about assignment. You may have felt burdened by a sense of responsibility you couldn't yet define, a desire to help, protect, fix, or speak truth. And when you couldn't act on it, it turned inward as frustration or sadness. But even that frustration was shaping discernment. God does not waste early awareness. He refines it. Over time, He teaches you how to carry truth with wisdom, not urgency, conviction with love, not judgment, purpose with patience, not pressure. If you were drawn to meaning early, it was because God was aligning your heart with eternal things before temporary ones could distract you. He was teaching you to value depth over appearance, truth over comfort, and calling over convenience. What once made you feel out of place is the very thing that will one day position you to bring clarity where others remain confused. Number 5. Early spiritual resistance. Inner battles or unseen opposition. Another sign that often appears in those chosen from the cradle is resistance that begins before they understand what they are resisting. As a child, you may have experienced inner battles that felt too complex for your age, confusion without a clear source, fear that didn't match your environment, a heaviness that came and went without explanation. This is not something people like to talk about, but the Bible is clear. Where there is calling, there is opposition, not because you were doing something wrong, but because something valuable was being protected by God and therefore noticed by the enemy. You may not have had the language for it then, but something was contending for your attention, your identity, your peace. While other children drifted naturally toward comfort or distraction, you felt pulled into internal conflict. You wrestled with thoughts you didn't invite. You felt tension you couldn't explain, and at times you may have felt misunderstood even by yourself. The enemy does not wait for purpose to fully manifest before attempting interference. He recognizes trajectory early. Scripture shows that God's chosen ones often faced resistance before their calling was revealed, not after. The goal was never to defeat them, but to discourage them into forgetting who they were before they ever discovered it. As a child, this opposition may have shown up as anxiety, confusion, or a deep sense of being overwhelming by life. You may have felt like something was always trying to pull you off balance, away from peace, away from clarity, away from trust. Yet even then, God's protection surrounded you more closely than you realized. What is important to understand is this: God never allowed more than you could carry. Even when you felt shaken, you were never unguarded. Even when you didn't understand the battle, heaven was aware of it. Many chosen people grow up thinking something is wrong with them because of these early struggles. But Scripture tells a different story. Spiritual resistance is not proof of weakness. It is evidence of assignment. Light attracts attention. Purpose creates pressure. And yet, despite the resistance, something remarkable remained true. You were preserved. You may have stumbled, questioned, or doubted, but you were not destroyed. You were kept, guarded, redirected again and again. that preservation matters. It means God's hand was stronger than the opposition. It means your life was never up for negotiation. And it means the battles that once confused you are now beginning to make sense. What once felt like chaos was actually containment. God was limiting the damage while strengthening your discernment. He was teaching your spirit to recognize truth, to cling to Him, and to survive pressure without losing identity. If you faced resistance early, it was not because you were vulnerable. It was because you were valuable. And now, what once tried to weaken you has instead sharpened your awareness. The very battles meant to silence you are becoming the proof that you were never meant to be ordinary. Number 6. No matter how far you strayed, God kept pulling you back. One of the most undeniable signs of being chosen from the cradle is this: you were never able to fully escape God. Even when you tried, even when you wandered, even when you were tired of believing, tired of hoping, tired of carrying weight you never asked for. There may have been seasons when you ran in the opposite direction, toward distraction, self-reliance, or silence. Times when you told yourself you were done with faith, done with calling, done with asking God questions that seemed unanswered. You may have blended in for a while, lived like everyone else, tried to be normal. But something always interrupted the escape. Just when you thought you had settled into a different path, God stepped in, not always gently, but faithfully. Doors closed without explanation. Relationships collapsed suddenly. Plans unraveled, and while it felt frustrating at the time, looking back, you can see it now. You were being redirected, not rejected. The Bible teaches that the calling of God is irrevocable. When He chooses someone early, He does not withdraw His hand when they struggle. He disciplines, He redirects, He pursues, not because He is controlling, but because He is committed. Chosen ones may wander, but they are never abandoned. You may have noticed a pattern in your life where destruction never fully succeeded. You could make mistakes, but they didn't take you out. You could fall, but not beyond recovery. You could drift, but never disappear. God kept you within reach, even when you tried to move beyond it. This constant pull back to God is not coincidence. It is covenant. God does not chase everyone the same way. Some people walk away and never look back. Others try to leave and find themselves restless, convicted, unsettled. That unrest is mercy. It is God refusing to let you forget who you are. Even your failures served a purpose. They showed you the limits of self-direction. They taught you humility. They stripped away illusions of control. And in the process, they refined your dependence on God rather than your confidence in yourself. If you look closely, you'll see that every time you reached a breaking point, God met you there, not with condemnation, but with correction, not with abandonment, but with redirection. That is the mark of someone chosen early. God was never trying to trap you in obedience. He was teaching you that your life only makes sense in alignment with Him. And no matter how long it took, He was willing to wait. Because what He placed inside you from the beginning was too valuable to lose. And now the same God who guarded you when you didn't understand Him is calling you to walk with Him consciously. What was once instinctive is becoming intentional. What once pulled you is now inviting you. You were chosen before you knew it, kept when you didn't deserve it, and called back not to shame you, but to fulfill what was always meant to be. Conclusion. When you look back now, the pattern becomes clear. What once felt confusing begins to make sense. Your childhood was not random. The pressure, the sensitivity, the isolation, the questions, the battles, the wandering, none of it was wasted. It was all shaping you for something that could not be formed quickly. God does not rush the making of those He trusts with depth. He allows time, process, and even pain to do their work. While others were learning how to fit in, you were learning how to endure. While others were being entertained by life, you were being prepared by it. You were not overlooked in your early years. You were observed, watched over, guarded. Even in moments when it felt like God was silent, His hand never left you. The fact that you are still here, still searching, still sensitive to truth, still drawn toward Him, is proof that He has been involved every step of the way. What you once called wounds were actually points of shaping. What you called delays were layers of protection. And what you called confusion was God keeping you from stepping into something before you were ready to carry it. Being chosen from the cradle does not mean your life would be easier. It means your life would be intentional. It means your character had to be formed before your platform, your heart refined before your influence, your faith tested before your assignment. Now comes a different season. Not one where you question whether God is with you, but one where you begin to understand why He always was. The same God who marked you early is still speaking, still guiding, still unfolding purpose with precision. And the depth you carry is no longer a burden to survive. It is a calling to steward. You were never behind. You were being prepared. And now what began in the cradle is ready to move forward on purpose.